Hey everyone, sorry about the technical difficulties. I think I accidentally closed my slides. I was sitting here ready to go and all of a sudden I'm like, where are my slides? So anyway, I had to stop the screen share and restart again, but we're all good now, right? Let me know if you can hear me and if you can see the first slide in the slideshow. So I want to make sure I'm not just talking to myself. An echo. Okay, one person said they hear an echo. Does anybody else hear an echo? If you hear an echo, it may be that you signed in on two devices, and although I'm not sure. Is the sound quality good? Okay, good. Sounds good. Okay. All right. So if you hear an echo, you might need to sign off and try coming back in, or like I said, maybe you have two devices signed in. Okay. All right. So we will go ahead and get started. I just want to say hi real quick. I have a cough and a fever today, but I think I'm going to be okay. I'm going to have my finger on the mute button, and so if I suddenly go silent, it may be that I'm coughing. And I don't want you guys to have to listen to it, or the people listening to the replay. So sorry I'm running a little bit late, but we're going to go ahead and get started now. And I'm going to keep myself off camera most of the time because I probably don't look so good. All right, let's get started. The first thing I just want to point out that we've rebranded this year. We used to have the Thrifty Homesteader Academy, and we were on the Teachable platform. And last year we moved to Mighty Network, which is fabulous because it has a really great private group function. Nobody can get into that group unless they are in a paid course or a paid member. We do have some free courses in there, but the people who join the free courses are just in the free courses. So there's no trolls. And it's so wonderful to be in there. Sandra, yay, you love Mighty Network. Cool. Yeah, they've been around now for about 6 or 7 years. And when it comes to creating community, it's a really great place to be. And I decided to rebrand as the Goat Academy and focus on our goat courses because that is literally what 99% of people see me for. They see me as the goat lady. People meet me and say like, oh, they had no idea that they had no idea that I had chickens or anything like that. And it's like, well, yeah, we have everything. So the URL for it is goatacademy.net. And we'll give you a link a little bit later. We're going to give you a link directly to our kitting course with a discount. So everybody that's here tonight can get a discount on the kitting course. So we are going to go ahead and get started now. You're in the right place if you raise goats, or even better, if you're thinking about raising goats. I've had students in my UMass class before who've gotten to the end of the semester and they have to write an essay. And I've had several people tell me, I'm so glad I took this class because it made me realize I don't want to raise goats. And I really feel like that's a win, because if you don't know what is involved, then you spend all this money with infrastructure and supplies and goats, and then you realize that you didn't want to do it. So yay, if anybody is here who doesn't even have goats yet, or maybe just has a couple pet wethers and you're wondering if you want to start breeding, welcome. I'm glad you're here. You're in the right place if you want to know how to avoid some of the most common mistakes when your goats give birth. And if you want to relax in the days and weeks leading up to your goats giving birth. I've had more people than I can count who've been in a panic for 2 weeks before their goat gives birth because They keep thinking she's going to go into labor. And so first of all, premature labor is very rare in goats. But there's nothing you can do about it. That's the other thing. And so really in just about every one of those cases, the goat goes the full gestation and gives birth to healthy kids when they were expected. So if you don't want to spend days and nights sleeping in your freezing barn, because what's really sad about that is that a lot of people can be out there for days and then they go into the house and the goat gives birth. Like they're gone 15 minutes and they come back and the goat has babies. And you're in the right place if you want to have as many successful outcomes as possible, because that's really what we all want. Yeah, Sandra just said cams. Yes, I am such a huge fan of cameras and baby monitors, and it is so much easier now than it used to be. When we got our first baby monitor in 2003, we have a metal barn, and so we had to put the monitor in the window because it wouldn't go through the metal. So yes, all of you who are saying cameras and baby monitors in the chat, big thumbs up to all of you. And for those of you who don't have it yet, we're just talking about a $15, $20 baby monitor that you can get at the discount store in town. They're so good now. The last one we bought actually goes through walls. And we have both. We have so many cameras now. We've got Ring cameras. We've tried so many different kinds. One of the things on my to-do list is to write an article about the different cameras and how well they work and stuff. Sandra says she's used Roku. So hopefully if you don't have electricity, you will get it out there soon. Because the other thing you need it for, if you're in a cold climate, is you might need it for a blow dryer or heat lamps. So yes, I love it. People are sharing in the chat some of the baby monitors and cameras that work for them. So yeah, I make sure that the cords are in a place where they can't chew on them. So, all right. So for those of you, I see a lot of familiar names, but for those of you who don't know me, I've been raising goats since 2002. We've had Nigerians that whole time. We had La Manchas in the middle of that. I absolutely love my beautiful little earless wonders. I just think they're the cutest thing ever. But after my two daughters grew up and left home, I realized I only had the bandwidth to have one breed. And so the Nigerians won because of their smaller size and their higher butter fat, because our main goal was to make cheese, and the high butter fat of the Nigerians is really good for that. And I am not getting any younger. And so dealing with smaller goats is easier. I'm the author of 6 books, including these that are all about homesteading and raising goats. And I've also been teaching for the University of Massachusetts Stockbridge School of Agriculture since 2013. So mistake number 1 is assuming that your doe will know what to do. Now, a lot of them do, but you really can't count on this, especially with first fresheners. A lot of first fresheners think they're dying. Like it can be scary with first fresheners, because some of them just scream bloody murder, like they are being pulled limb from limb. And then when the baby comes out, they're just like, oh, thank goodness. And they just don't even look at it. They're just so relieved that this pain is over. And so it's really good to be there, especially for your first fresheners. Dairy goats do not seem to be as clued in as meat goats and most sheep breeds. We make sure that we are there for every single goat birth. And so we've had about 760 kids. We've had like around 250 lambs. And I have seen almost no sheep births at all. My sheep give birth on pasture, unassisted. And we've only found dead lambs twice. That's it, out of 250. So, and I will say that we had Shetlands for 12 years, and then we've had Katahdins for 10 years. And those are known for good mothering and everything. There are some sheep breeds that are not as good, kind of like, dairy goats don't seem to be as clued in as meat goats. I have some does that I call them divas because they just lay there like, they want me to take care of everything. It's like, well, I pushed the baby out. Now you need to dry it off. And, but others will just pop right up, turn around and start licking them off. Now, even if you've got the world's best mother, they may not do well in freezing temperatures because they just weren't made to be able to survive freezing temperatures. Again, sheep do better because of the wool, and even wool is even good when it's wet. It's good insulator when it's wet. So I am just amazed at how well our lambs have done when they have been born in freezing temperatures. But goats can very easily wind up with hypothermia. And the first thing to go is their sucking instinct, which means they don't get colostrum. And if they don't get colostrum, they're not going to make it. The other thing is when goats have multiples, they may not have time to get them cleaned up before the next one comes out. A lot of people worry that multiples are going to have trouble, that they're going to get tangled up. And that has not been my experience because we have Nigerians and we got some genetic lines that have high multiples. I don't even know how many quads we've had out of that 760 kids, but we've had 8 sets of quintuplets and 1 set of sextuplets. So we have had a lot of high multiples, and I have a video of 5 kids coming out in 10 minutes. So I was not even like, I've got 2 arms, I've got towels, and I was having trouble getting those kids wiped off and everything because she was just shooting them out so fast. Now, there's no way you could expect a doe to take care of 4 or 5 babies if they are coming out in 10 minutes, especially when it's cold. So your doe may not be able to deal with all the kids that she has. And we have had, sorry, y'all. Let's see. I think, okay, I forgot what I was going to say next. Okay, mistake number 2 is not having a baby monitor or video monitor. We talked about this quite a bit already just in the intro section. So that's very important because if you don't have it, then people wind up staying with the goat from the moment they think she's in labor. And that causes you to freak out. That causes me to freak out. I realized years ago that, so what would happen is we would be, so like we think she's in labor, which if you're new, you're probably going to think this like a day or 2 before she really is. I say sometimes you wish them into labor, like you really want them to have these cute, adorable babies so much. And so you wind up like seeing every little thing as labor. And so you stay with them. And then what would happen with us is that when we would go to leave, the goat would start screaming. And we're like, oh, she's close, I can't leave. And what was cool is when we got the video cameras, we realized that they would stop screaming once we were out of the barn. So once they knew we were gone, it was like, oh, she left me. Okay. And then they would be quiet. So yeah, Sandra says the stress is real. It definitely is. And then I am always so sad when I hear about people going to the barn over and over through the night to check on a doe that they think might be in labor. We actually used to sleep in the barn. I had 2 teenage daughters and they were very adventurous, and we would take turns sleeping in the barn if we thought a goat was in labor before we had cameras. So it's just, that's not good for you, especially like if you've got 20 does that are due to kid or 3 or 4 of them within a couple days. That is really, really stressful. And then you go in the house and the goat gives birth. People in my kidding course, one of the things that they think is really funny is that we were with this goat all morning, and I go in the house and I'm like, let's have lunch. She's not going to kid anytime soon. So we go in the house. I put 1 bite of food in my mouth one bite, and I hear that big, long scream over the monitor. And I'm running across the yard with food in my mouth to get out there. And the kid like comes out within seconds of me getting out there. The worst mistake I almost made was when it was well below zero. It was 10 or below zero or so. Oh, some of these memories are getting so old. It's getting hard to remember the exact details. It was well below zero. And I had checked on this goat. Her name was Joe. I had checked Joe's ligaments before, because I'm like, okay, it's time for bed. It's 10 o'clock. Check Joe's ligaments. And I'm like, wow, they are gone, totally gone. And so I put her in a kidding pen and figured, she'll probably give birth, tomorrow morning, because they were there, a while ago. So I go in the house and I'm brushing my teeth, and my husband comes into the bathroom and says, honey, I think I hear a baby goat over the monitor. And nobody had kidded yet. Joe was going to be the first one that spring. And he's like, I think I hear a baby goat over the monitor. And I'm like, no, you don't. I was just out there. She's nowhere close to kidding. He's like, no, I really, really think that I heard a baby goat. And I thought, okay, I'm going to feel like a real jerk if, because the kids would freeze to death really fast in below zero temperatures. And we're talking Fahrenheit here. If I've got anybody from another country like Canada that uses Celsius. So I go out to the barn to check, assuming that there will be nothing there. Like, he's hearing things. I go out there and there was not one kid. There were 3. And they were in a puddle of amniotic fluid. You know how sometimes does like paw at the ground and they make a nice little nest? Well, she had made a lovely little nest, big hole in the straw. She had spit out 3 kids without making any noise. The kids were screaming because they're freezing. And I started screaming at that point. I need help. There's 3 kids. They're in a puddle of fluid. So my husband and daughter came running out. We each grabbed a kid with a towel and we're drying it. And we weren't even paying much attention to her. And like 15 minutes later, she plops down and pushes out a 4th one. So thank goodness we had that baby monitor, because if we didn't, we would have had 4 goat sickles in the morning. And that would have been so incredibly sad. So, and I've heard this happen to people, they're like, they think, if I go out there every 2 hours, that's enough. And it's not. In 2 hours at below zero temperatures, those kids would have been frozen. And I mean, literally frozen. So I was so grateful that we had that at that time. And yeah, I've got lots of towels, heating pad, hair dryer, all that stuff. And you absolutely have to have a blow dryer when it's below zero, because water doesn't evaporate at below zero, it freezes. And so you've got to get like the ears and the tail really dry, otherwise they'll freeze and then they'll fall off from frostbite. Mistake number 3, and this is probably one of the biggest ones that I see, is intervening too quickly. And that is based on the fact that most people don't really know what's normal. And so they think all kinds of things are a problem. They think their doe is in labor when she's not. And unfortunately, there is a lot of really bad information on Facebook, and somehow it just keeps getting worse. Last year, somebody sent me a PDF from a Facebook group that talks about checking a doe when she's in labor. And if her cervix feels like a Cheerio, you should try to open it, which is completely wrong. It's unnecessary. The goat might not even be pregnant she might have if she's big and she's got an udder, she might have a false pregnancy. If the goat's cervix is completely closed, you are not going to be able to open it. You could, and there's a lot of things you could tear the uterus. You've got to understand intervention is needed in only 5% of births. Goats have been giving birth since the beginning of time, usually without any assistance. There are risks associated with intervening. And if you are helping every goat, then you have no idea who's a good kidder and who isn't, because you're not giving them a chance. And so I have a 2 strikes rule. If a goat needs assistance twice, she's retired. That's it. The end. And I've only done that with 3 goats out of all the almost 23 years now. All the goats we've had, I've only had 3 goats that had a problem with kidding more than once, where she needed a serious assistance. And one of those was a problem that I bought. This is why when somebody contacts me and they bought a goat because they felt sorry for it, I totally understand, because I did the same thing when I was new. I bought this goat that had 2 legs of her championship, and then she got a bad case of mastitis and couldn't show anymore because her udder was not even. It was now lopsided. So there's no way she's going to finish a championship with a lopsided udder. So I bought this goat, and after I got her, I found out that the lady that had her was basically treating her like a puppy mill goat because she didn't have a good udder. What she was doing was she was breeding her to kid every 6 months. Like, she would take the kids away at birth and she would breed her again next month. If a goat is nursing kids, she's not usually going to be able to get pregnant again for quite a few months. But if she has her kids taken away, then she will start to cycle again sooner. And so this lady was breeding her every 6 months. And this goat was just in such poor condition. And it was horrible. This is like, I think I've only had my arm in a goat up to my elbow twice, and she was one of them. Like, it was horrible. And then the second time again, it was bad. And so I was like, all right, that's it. You're done. And one of her daughters had kidding problems too. And I think it was because, I don't think it was genetic. I think it was because she was basically had nutritional issues from the day she was born. Her mom just didn't, I didn't know enough about nutrition back then. We still had a copper deficiency problem that I didn't know about. And so there was just a lot that was against them. And I've learned I learned from several goats in the early years that when they are malnourished, there is nothing else there's nothing that you're going to do that's going to fix that. And sometimes the best thing for that goat is just to make them a pet. And so that's what happened with her daughter. She actually died within 6 months of the second kidding. And that daughter, after the second kidding, the person who had bought her 2 sisters the year before or 2 years earlier contacted me and said, hey, I saw that you're going to be selling beauty, and I thought it would be great if I could reunite her with her sisters. And they were all pets. And I was like, sure, that sounds fantastic. So that's what she did. She went and lived out her life with her 2 sisters. And if I could sell every one of my goats to a home like those 3 goats had, plus her son, that goat had a son that I weathered, of course. So they all went to live with Elise for their whole natural lives. And they lived like around 12 to 17 years. And she was such a great goat owner. So you need to know when to help. It is important to know when to help, like what's a problem, and when to ask for help. Like, when is this more than what you can do? And sometimes that may be from somebody who's more experienced, or it may be from your vet. And do not let anybody convince you that you can raise your goats on Facebook without a vet, because there will be times that you need prescription drugs. There will be times you need diagnostics. There will be times that you may have a goat that needs a C-section. It's less than 1%. We've had 3 C-sections. So that's about 1%. So, because we've had 760 kids, and our average now, in the early years, our average was really low because of our nutritional problems. But our average for like the last 8 or 10 years has been over 3 kids per doe every year. So that means our C-section rate is about 1%. About 1 out of every 100 does needs a C-section. And I will talk about some of those things a little more as we get farther into this. The dumbest kidding mistake I ever made was actually with this goat. And this is why I put this picture here. This is Sherry. She was the 5th goat that I ever bought. I talk about Sherry all the time. She is one of the grand matriarchs of my herd. We bought does for only 3 years. And so from 2002 to 2005, I bought does. I kept the ones I loved and I sold the rest. And Sherry is one of the ones I absolutely loved. And she was like the most amazing kidder. Her daughters were the most amazing kidders. Her daughter Jo is the one that gave birth in that sub-zero temperature. And we didn't even hear her over the baby monitor. We heard the kids. So like they all just are amazing kidders. Like I've run to the barn so many times when I hear a goat kidding. Because they're just like hanging out really chill. And then all of a sudden they're like, okay, now kid's coming. So the dumbest kidding mistake I ever made was actually with Sherry. It was the first year she was on our farm. She was going to be a 2-year-old second freshener. And like a lot of people, so I was like in my 4th year of goat ownership then. And like a lot of people then, I didn't really know what the tail ligaments were. I was confused between the ligaments and the muscles. And so we thought she was close to giving birth long before she really was close to giving birth. And this was back in the days of the Yahoo groups. And I posted on the Yahoo group about, oh, her ligaments have been gone for 2 days now. And, she hasn't kidded yet. And most people were like, oh, she just needs more time. But this one person was like, oh my God, you have to go in. You have to get those kids out now or they're going to die. And she convinced me to do that. And I did, and found a completely closed cervix. So and at that point, I called my mentor, who had 25 years of kidding experience. And she said, she's not in labor. If her cervix is closed, she's not in labor. So I felt horrible, so horrible that I had just put this goat through that, because she certainly didn't like it. She's screaming the whole time I was trying to force my hand in there. And she went, and so then I was like, oh my gosh, we're so dumb. We don't know anything. And I put her out in the pasture, and a day or 2 later, she gave birth in the pasture with nobody there. And Sherry never needed help kidding, ever. Her daughters don't need help. They've given birth to kids in like just big kids in kind of weird positions, like all kinds of things. So anyway, this is a picture of her. She was standing up. Goats usually lay down, but sometimes they stand up. And so this is one reason that you need to be there, because this kid was coming out with the sack. The sack wasn't broken. And there's another picture in here. You'll see the kid's coming out. The sack is completely covering its face. And so I pulled the sack off so that when that umbilical cord breaks, it'll be able to breathe. Now, like somebody just said in the chat, just like with humans, the more you go in, the more likely you are to cause an infection or tearing. So thank you so much. You've got to be kidding, Mini Farm. I love your name. Thank you for sharing that, because that is absolutely true. And this is especially serious now that you cannot buy antibiotics over the counter. Again, this is where like you're going to need a vet. I just was helping somebody yesterday. She had a spine first presentation, which is super, super weird if you've got a kid that is alive. Usually you don't get those goofy presentations unless it's dead. And so the uterus is just kind of pushing around this blob of flesh and it just winds up in some random position. Live kids usually do a very good job of getting themselves into that diving position, or even, hind end first. But, that's one of the things, like I told her, I said, do you have a vet? Because if not, you need to try and find one and know that if within a couple days, this goat, you go in there and this goat is like laying in the corner, she doesn't want to eat, she's probably got an infection and you're going to have to get antibiotics. And so she said her vet recently retired. So they were very busily trying to find another vet that they would be able to contact for antibiotics if necessary. Tetanus is also a possibility. Tetanus is everywhere. It can happen with any kind of an open wound, especially in an anaerobic environment. So that is also a possibility. A ruptured uterus is a possibility too. And last year on Facebook, there was a huge discussion, really argument about this topic on one of my Facebook pages. And I was really shocked that it was weird. Like some people thought that it's impossible. Like, no, you can't rupture the uterus. And other people were like, oh, it tears every time a kid is born, which is also completely false. Like, no, it opens, it dilates, and the kid can't come out until it's fully dilated. If you try to force it open, you're going to tear it. A small tear can definitely result in an infection, and a larger tear can result in a hemorrhage and death. And if you've got my kidding book, then you know that you probably read Coco's story. Coco is the goat up there in that top picture. And she was the first goat to ever have quintuplets on my farm. And she really outdid herself. She didn't just do it once, she did it twice. And the second time she did it, she was 9 years old. And 2 kids were trying to come out at the same time. And I was still fairly new. And I would push. I got the first kid out fine. But then 2 more were trying to come out together. And I would try to push one back and grab the other one. And the second one would come forward again. And I was still too inexperienced to know that I really, really needed to push one of those kids way, way back into the uterus so that I could grab the other one and pull it forward. And so we took her to the University Vet Hospital, which is 2 hours away. So this is the other thing. A lot of people on social media are just freaking out, telling you that your goat is going to drop dead at any second. And that's just not true. If this is a healthy goat, she's not going to drop dead at any second. No animal ever died from labor. They can die from toxemia. They can die from hypocalcemia, but they're not going to die from labor. They can die from a hemorrhage. And so I took it. We took Coco in and drove 2 hours. And the vet there delivered 4 live kids. So she'd been pushing at that point for probably 3 or 4 hours by the time we got her in. And the vet pulled 4 live kids. They were all completely healthy. And then Coco got up and she went and stood in the corner. And she was mentally checked out. And I had never seen one of my goats like that before. And I asked the vet, like, what's wrong with her? Something's wrong. Like, she's a fabulous mother. Like, this is not normal for her to go and stand with her head in the corner, ignoring her babies. And the vet said she's just mad, which was very wrong. It's basically because she had a large tear, and she was hemorrhaging and she was losing blood. And the vet's like, she's fine. You can take her home, take home the kids. This is like 2:00 in the morning. And so we took her home. We got home like about 5 a.m. I went to bed. And then at 7, my husband got up to go do chores. And he came back in and woke me up and said, Coco's dead. And I was just devastated. And I called and I talked to the vet, and she's like, I don't understand. There's no way that should have happened. Would you please bring her back? I want to do a necropsy. And so I said, sure. And so I took her in and they did a necropsy, and she had a tear in her uterus. So I believe it was like 14 centimeters. It was huge. So she bled out in no time. And I said, I don't understand how she could have bled to death. Like, I never saw any blood. And the vet said she bled out internally. And this is the thing that people do not understand. So if somebody is intervening in a birth and the goat dies within a couple hours, they could have bled to death. But without a necropsy, you're not going to know that. Like, that vet had her hand in there multiple times to pull those 4 kids out, and she had no idea that the goat had a 14 centimeter tear in her uterus. Goats are horizontal creatures. You know, we're all vertical, right? So after we have a baby, we are going through the pads like crazy because gravity is pushing the blood out of us. Well, a goat, they're horizontal and they got this big belly there. And so if they're bleeding, most of the blood is going to pool in their abdomen. It's not going to come out. So this is why you've got so many people on Facebook who are just crazy about intervening and thinking the goat's going to die. And they have no idea that they can cause a tear in the uterus that can result in a hemorrhage that's so severe that the goat can bleed to death, and that they are not going to see blood. Another thing that happened, and Alex's story is actually, there was no intervention in Alex's story, but this could happen too. So I'm actually gonna switch here to show you guys. In a previous life, I was a childbirth educator. So I pulled this out because last year I discovered that a lot of people do not know the difference between the vulva, vagina, cervix, and uterus. And so this is a human uterus for my childbirth educator days for humans. This is the vagina. This is the uterus. This is the opening to the vagina, which is the vulva. I've had people contact me and say, the goat's fully dilated, but I can't find any kids, because they think that if they can get their hand into the vagina, that's dilated, and that's not dilated. The cervix is inside here, and I can fold this back. So like the cervix is the opening to the uterus, and that's what the contractions cause the cervix to open. And when the cervix opens, the kids will then come out. In humans, it was like down, but in a goat, they're going to enter the vagina from the uterus when it's fully dilated, and then they come out. So this would be a uterine tear. So like if you've got your arm all the way up into the uterus and you're rearranging kids and stuff, you can wind up with a uterine tear. But the vagina is what you're going through to get into the uterus. And you can also get a vaginal tear. And Alex was a really small goat. She was one of my smaller Nigerians, and she gave birth to this guy here, this white kid with some spots on him. He was like 5 pounds. That's huge for a Nigerian, and that's especially huge for a small goat like Alex. So she gave, and when he came out, he was covered with blood, which we actually had an intern there at the time, and she's like, this was not her first birth, and she's like, I've never seen that much blood. Is that okay? And I was like, no, I've never seen that much blood either. So, and then Alex got up and she walked away, just like Coco had. She would not let her kids nurse. She would not let us milk her. And I called the University Vet Hospital, and they said, if with this being such a big kid, she may just be in a lot of pain. And but if you're worried and you want to bring her in, you can. So I took her in, and that's when we found out that she had a tear. She had a tear in her vagina, which, like I said, that's where the kids go after they leave the uterus, on their way out. And because this kid was so big, I didn't help at all. Like, Alex did it all by herself. You can see she's out in the pasture. Like, I looked out the window and I was like, oh my gosh, she's pushing. So I go running out there with towels. I have a rule. I never move a goat that's pushing. We used to do that in the early days, and then we realized that it would stop their labor for a while, and then we'd be freaking out. And it always ended fine. Like, the labor would start again, but it just seemed like it was silly. Like, why are we moving them? Like, and this was a beautiful spring day. It's like, why are we moving her? Like, we'll just let her kid right here. We've got towels. We can dry the kids off. And so we did. But anyway, she was, again, like, mentally checked out. She wanted nothing to do with the kids, nothing to do with us. She was an experienced mom, an experienced milker. So I was very worried about her. And I took her in, and that's when we found out that she had that vaginal tear. She actually wound up spending a whole week at the hospital. And they told me that that she should not ever be bred again. If she was bred again, she would probably need a C-section, because scar tissue in the vagina does not stretch. And so if she wound up giving birth again vaginally, she'd probably hemorrhage again. So we never bred her again. And she was already about, I think, 6 or 7 at that point. Actually, this goat, we were like, well, we're just going to see how long we can milk her. And we milked her for 3 years. So that was pretty cool. And so this is why I am just so adamant about people not breeding a Nigerian doe to a larger buck. Like, I don't even want to hear that you bred your Nigerian to a half Nigerian buck. Like, because she was bred to a Nigerian buck, and she had a 5-pound kid. So I have had a couple goats have given birth successfully to 5-pound kids. But we had Alex here who almost bled to death. And I had another goat that had to have a C-section with a 5-pound, 1-ounce kid. He was just too big. So that's what one of our C-sections was caused by. The kid was just too big. And again, she was a smaller doe like Alex. So Simply Dish asked in the comments if it's healthy to milk that long. Absolutely. Yeah. I was really excited at the ADGA conference last fall. They had a session on extended milking, and there was a guy there with a commercial dairy. He said he had a goat that milked like 6 or 7 years. It was a Saanen. So he's got I think it was, if they were giving 8 pounds, as long as they were giving him 8 pounds or more, he would not rebreed them. And that goat just kept chugging along. That's a gallon. Because he said, yes, they're going to peak at like 15 or 16 for the first month or two after they kid, but they're also dry for 2 months. So it was actually more profitable for him to just keep milking them. If they're producing at least a gallon a day, just keep milking them as long as they will do that. And so we have a lot of, actually that became my goal after my kids left. I said, my new goal is that every goat in my herd can milk for at least 2 years. So that's what we've been doing is, for quite a few years now. Every goat on our farm has milked for 2 years. I've only sold one, because she couldn't do it. So, it's all about the genetics. So I'm just going to quickly go through the signs of labor here. So, and we go into a lot more detail of this in our kidding course. And so typical signs that a doe will kid within 12 to 24 hours is that her udder usually has a really big change within the 24 hours. They may start to get an udder, a couple weeks before kidding. In fact, some really outstanding milkers, you might even see an udder like 3 or 4 weeks before kidding. But usually the day that they kid, I call it the wow udder because, and in the kidding course, I show you every single goat. That's when they go in the kidding pen, usually for sure, if they're not in there already, is when we get that wow udder. You go in there and you see the goat, she turns around and you're like, whoa, that was not like that yesterday. The next thing is tail ligaments. And a lot of people, I would say probably 90%, 95% of people on Facebook do not know the difference between the tail ligaments and the muscles. They're like, oh, just feel back there, where the spine meets the tail. And when it gets squishy, that means their ligaments are gone. No, those are the muscles. Tail ligaments are like pencils. The tail ligament goes from the spine to the out. And so you got to find those pencils. They feel like hard pencils until the goat is 12 to 24 hours of kidding. Then they start to feel like rubber bands, and then you can't find them. So, there are people who go, oh, I can wrap my fingers around her tail head. I show you that in my kidding course. I'm like, look at this goat. I can wrap my fingers around her tail head. People would be going, oh my gosh, her ligaments are gone. But they're not. They're right here. I still feel these pencils. They're still hard. She's nowhere close to kidding. And just because a goat's muscles are all mushy 2 weeks before she kids does not mean she's going to kid anytime soon. Does not mean her tail ligaments are going to go away anytime soon. It actually took me a long time to teach this to my husband when he started helping, because he knew nothing about goats till our daughters were gone. And then I was like, well, if you still want cheese, you're going to have to learn to help. And so he would just be like, oh, this doe is like, oh, she's heard so squishy, like for a week now. And I'm like, somebody else could just go from 0 to 100 in 24 hours and pass her really fast. And after seeing it happen multiple times, I'm like, see, you can't let the ones with the squishy muscles fool you. So start checking that 2 weeks before the due date and compare it to your other does. This softness is connected to the doe's hormone levels. So you may also have heard people go, oh, the ligaments went away and then they came back. No, they didn't. That would be truly bad if they did, because it would mean your doe's hormones thought she was going to give birth and then she decided not to. That doesn't happen. What happens is people don't really know where the ligaments are. I feel like I got really lucky with this, although at the time I did not feel lucky. Do any of you have teenagers? I learned to raise goats with 2 teenage daughters, and they just love to prove me wrong, which I guess should not be surprised. One of them, grew up and became an electrical engineer and a project manager for power companies, and the other one got a PhD in biological chemistry. So they're smart girls, and they just loved to prove me wrong. And I would come in and say, oh, Blanche's ligaments are completely gone, and they would go running out there, and then they come back like, no, Mom, you don't know what the ligaments are. She still has her ligaments. And so I would go back out there and I would check again, and I'm like, oh, dang it, they were right again. So I always had them checking on me and telling me when I got it wrong. So the third thing is the belly drops. And I kind of view this as the trifecta. You might, usually the belly drops within a few hours of kidding, but you might start to see this hollowness, there. You might start to see that a little earlier. So can you guys see my mouse? I'm pointing right there. See where that shadow is? That's because the babies have dropped into position to be born. And so this is like she went from looking like a tabletop, as my daughter used to say. She'd come in and go, no, she's still a tabletop. And then you go out there and you've got this, it's just really, really noticeable. So that happens usually within a few hours of kidding, but I usually want to see all three of these things. The belly is is not as reliable. The tail ligaments are the most reliable. And then the udder and the belly are the next. You'll see behavior and personality changes, and a loss of food might be loss of interest in food might be one of those things. Back when we had La Manchas, there was a La Mancha that was our herd queen, and she was very, aggressive. She always wanted to be first in line for feed. She was always pushing other goats away. And, one morning when my daughter came in and she's like, Viola is not interested in food. And it was like, okay, she's probably going to kid today. But when that happens, you need to keep an eye on them, because you don't want them to go more than a few hours without food when they are pregnant, because that could lead to ketosis, which could lead to toxemia if untreated. People pay way too much attention to the vagina, the mucus. Oh gosh, I should have said vulva. Y'all, okay. So the outside part is the vulva, the vagina is the inside part. So string of mucus coming out of the vagina. I get messages from people all the time that say, my goat lost her mucus plug. I'm like, she's got mucus, send me a picture. And I'm like, send me a picture. And it's like, I can't even see it. I would not have even noticed it if they wouldn't have told me. And it's like, maybe she just peed. That's not really mucus. This is mucus. This is what you're looking for. When you see this, I don't leave the barn when I see mucus like this. Mostly because I don't want to come running across the yard if I, hear her pushing really actively. So anyway, and so it's one of the least reliable indicators of labor, especially if it's a small amount. You may or may not see mucus. It just, because what happens is, as the cervix is opening, the mucus can exit the uterus. That's really it. So if you see mucus like this, it means the cervix is opening. But if you just see moisture, it's maybe she just peed. If you just see a teensy weensy little bit, it probably doesn't mean her cervix is opening. So, Rebecca said that she's never gotten the ligament thing right. She can't feel them. If there's anybody around that you could practice with, that would be cool, because if you can have somebody else right there with you, like my daughters, if you can have somebody there with you and showing you exactly where they are. And also, I've got a video that shows you how to find them. And lots of people who have taken that course have said, oh, I can find the ligaments now. So I've added this slide. This is part of the 2025 edition here, because I had somebody a couple years ago contact me and said, she said, my goat's been in labor for 2 days, which I hear this all the time, and I don't worry. But then she said that she wasn't eating, and I asked her to send me a video, And it was like, that is not a goat in labor. That is a goat in ketosis or toxemia, which is what happens if ketosis goes untreated. If a goat is not eating for several hours and she's not in active labor, she may have ketosis. So last year I had a goat that kind of all day long, I was kind of like, I think she's in early labor. But nothing was happening. And I didn't see, she was in a kidding pen, so she had her own hay, and I didn't see the hay going down. So before I went to bed that night, I gave her a little bit of grain, and she just gobbled it up because, goats love grain, right? She gobbled up the grain. So I was like, okay, cool. She's fine because she just gobbled it up. So if your goat is not eating for several hours, you want to see if you can get them to eat because you want them to keep up their strength. So it doesn't always happen that a goat stops eating. And I never would have thought to tell anybody this, except there's a blog out there that I have been made aware of where this person tried to, she assumed, it's like, she's got a picture of her goat with mucus, like what I just showed you. And she's like, she had mucus and she was eating. Oh no, I knew something was wrong. I knew I had to help. And so she goes in and tries to force the cervix open, and which the cervix would have opened if she had done nothing. So she didn't need to do that. There is nothing wrong with a goat eating when she's in labor. Like, it blew me away that somebody would think that was a bad sign. Like, that's really good if your goat is eating while she's in labor. I worry if they stop eating, because that could be, because then they can go into ketosis, which can lead to toxemia, possibly hypocalcemia. Like, you want your goat to be eating when they're in labor to keep up their strength. So I added this because of those things. Yeah, Sandra says you almost always have a goat eating through labor. I know. I've had goats grab and Give Me Faith Farm, same thing. I had a first freshener who was grabbing snacks of hay in between pushing. Yeah, totally. I've had goats do that. Like, I laugh at them and I make it, I joke. They grab a bite of hay and then scream with the hay in their mouth, and I'm like, hey, don't talk with your mouth full. So that is totally fine if your goat is eating while she's in labor. So anyway, and on this subject of like trying to manually open the cervix, I wanted to add a slide for this and I wasn't quite sure where to add it. But the vet textbook, Goat Medicine, it says 95% of goats need no assistance. It also says that manually trying to dilate the cervix has not been shown to work. And I think it was in an older version. She said, I'm not sure if it's in the latest edition. She says it's not that. She knew that there were goat owners who said that it worked, but she thinks it's because the goat owners intervene when they don't really need to. So the goat would have dilated even if they had done nothing. Whereas vets in research are going to be less emotionally attached. They're more, they're making their decisions based more on like the science of what they're seeing, anyway, I looked and I found a study that actually compared that. And in that study, 82% of the goats that were not dilating had to have a C-section. And that was the cause of one of our C-sections. We had a goat that she was pushing like crazy, and she was pushing like crazy, and I didn't see anything. And so I went to check her after she'd been pushing for a while with no progress. And I realized that her cervix was only about half open. Like just the kid's nose was sticking out of the cervix. And so I had to call. So I called the vet hospital and talked to them. And it's a 2-hour drive, like I mentioned before. And the vet professor I spoke to said, well, since it's a 2-hour drive, you might try this. It doesn't usually work, but you might try it. So I did. And I really wish I wouldn't have, because it didn't work. I wish I had known then, like, that it really doesn't work. And so we wound up taking her in for a C-section. And 3 of the 4 kids were born alive, but 1 died like within 5 minutes of being born by C-section. And if I had not wasted time trying to open the cervix and just taken her in right away, that 3rd kid probably would have been alive. Because what happens is that after a goat's been pushing for somewhere around 6 to 8 hours, the placenta may start to separate. And this is why, like, after your kids are born, like if your kids are born, like within half an hour of the goat starting to push, you're not going to see a placenta for a few hours. Like that's just kind of how it goes. So John asked the name of the book. That's Goat Medicine. And you want like the 23 or 24. There's 3 editions. So you want the 3rd edition of Goat Medicine, 2023 or 2024. It is a $200 book. It's 900 pages. Don't read the whole thing. You'll freak yourself out. I have all of the goat vet textbooks so that I can find answers to questions that people have. Most people are not going to want these books though, because they're so expensive. And if you're in my community, that's one of the benefits of being in my community, is that I can look up these answers for you. Ketosis means that they're spilling ketones in the urine because the body, they've quit eating. Like the keto diet is all about burning, burning something. All right, I'm not going to get into the keto diet. You can get ketone strips at any pharmacy. Diabetics have them, and they check their urine for ketones because they don't want to go into ketosis. Pregnant women do not want to go into ketosis. Somebody on a keto diet who wants to lose weight, they want to go into ketosis. So they basically starve themselves until they are spilling ketones in their urine. So anyway, we have a whole podcast episode on ketosis, and what you have to do is do your very, very best to get her to eat. If you cannot get her to eat, then that would be like then you would need to give her this is the only time I would recommend like Power Punch or what's another one like Power Punch? Nutri-Drench, because those people don't realize, they're like, oh, these are nutritious, Nutri-Drench. No, it's not nutritious. It's sugar. And the level of minerals they throw in there is not significant. They just try to make it look better. You can just give your goat corn syrup. And yes, it has to be corn syrup. Yeah, Sandra says Caro syrup. Caro syrup is 100% glucose, and that's what they need, is 100% glucose. Maple syrup is not. I've got all these written down somewhere. Maple syrup is not. Honey is not. Corn syrup is 100% glucose, and that's what they need. So we've got just the clear Caro syrup. We've got a podcast episode. If I've got any podcast listeners here and you know where to, like, if you go to the thriftyhomesteader.com website, you can find the podcast episode on toxemia in goats. Nancy said she's heard it. We also have one on hypocalcemia too. So, because that's like a half-hour conversation to go through all of that. So mistake number 4 is not calling the vet soon enough. And that has to do with not knowing what's normal or not. Like the lady who thought it was normal that her goat, it was normal that her goat wasn't eating for 2 days. And wasting time on social media or YouTube and wondering if you should just trust your gut. When somebody is new to birthing, their gut isn't really giving them a lot of good information. It's generally fear-based. And I've been doing a lot of reading and trying to understand more about how fear causes people to do things or not do things. And so really, the more you learn, the better you can just trust the process. Like, you can't really trust your gut when you've only been doing this goat birth thing for a short time, but goats have been doing it since the beginning of time, Now, that's not to say that things don't go wrong. They do. We've had 3 C-sections. The first thing I listed there is a schistosomus reflexus. And the nickname for that is inside out kid. That was our last C-section. That is most people that's like a 1 in 100,000. The person who did the C-section was actually a genetics professor, and she was taking pictures. She had never seen a schistosomus in person. And it's very, very rare in goats. If you want to learn more about this, Google inside out calf, because they see it a little more in cattle. It's very, very rare in goats. Like, I'm never going to see another one. I'd be more likely to win the lottery than to see another inside out kid. It's just very, very rare. Kids can be born with 2 heads, and they are not going to come out the normal exit if they've got 2 heads. And that's usually because they were conjoined twins and they didn't fully separate. So, or they were going to be identical twins, but they didn't fully separate. So now they're conjoined. So you could have multiple parts. So a lot of times when they do a necropsy on a 2-headed kid, they also find like 2 hearts, 2 lungs, double of everything, because it was basically identical twins that didn't separate. The last one here is a broken pelvis, which I never would have even thought about, except that it happened to a friend of mine who owns a dairy, and she has a couple hundred kids a year, every single year. I think she actually has a couple hundred goats. So it's more like 400 kids a year. And she had a goat trying to give birth, and she could not get the kid out. So she took it in, and they found out that the goat had a broken pelvis. And so that was interfering with the baby's ability to be born. So they had to do a C-section. And she has no idea how the goat wound up with a broken pelvis. Like, weird things happen. And these are like 1 in a million things. So, I, don't want you to worry. Like, this is not something I'm going to worry about. But it's just another reason that you need to have a vet that you can call. When we had that schistosomus, I was on the phone with the vet multiple times that day. And then I took the kid in, because it was weird. Like, I was not even thinking. I was like, there's just everything about that was weird. The whole story, I could talk about it for a couple hours, because I did. The whole story is in the kidding course, and even a video of the C-section. So Rebecca said her biggest issue is knowing when to help, as in how long once pushing starts before expecting first kid, then the time between next kids. So I hate there's a 30-30-30 rule, which I absolutely hate. Because it first of all, it makes people think like, oh my God, if the kid's not out in 30 minutes, it's going to die, which is not true. I've mentioned this multiple times. Kids can survive for hours after the goat starts pushing. So you have plenty of time to get to a vet, even if it's a 3-hour drive. Somebody just did that today. She said she was going to be on tonight, so I don't know if she is. She's had one heck of a time the last couple of days. So if she was in bed right now, I would not blame her. but she had to drive 3 hours to the vet, and kids were born healthy and alive. So do not believe those people on Facebook who tell you like, oh, you got to do something right now or the goat's going to die and the kids are going to die. And so it's really, and it's not, so it's not about the kids dying. It's a matter of so you see this goat here, she's got her mouth open, her ears are back, she's screaming, her legs are out. When a goat starts pushing like that, I really want to see something within like 10 or 15 minutes. And then I just want to see continuous progress. So as long as she's making progress, cool, you know? And so that's the other thing. Like if you let a goat push like this, like screaming bloody murder, mouth open where you can give her a dental exam while she's screaming, her ears are back, her legs are pushed out, she's panting, like within 30, if you let her push like that for 30 minutes, her head is going to be on the ground in exhaustion between pushes. And it's not about the kids dying. It's about like, something's probably not right. Like something's probably in a weird position, because if she's pushing like that, it should be coming out the exit if it's in a position, either nose and front feet first, or butt first, or hind legs first, one of those, one end or the other. And I know you say it's nerve-wracking, like it shouldn't be, it's like, because they're not going to die. The kid is getting everything it needs through the umbilical cord. And so that's one of the big things too. I just thought about this. I should have added this to the slides. There is a really bizarre thing going around Facebook that people think a kid is going to suffocate after the water breaks. Well, if that was true, 80% of my kids would be born dead. Like, I don't understand why people, like, these babies been living in water since it was conceived, and it's getting everything it needs through the umbilical cord. So as long as the umbilical cord is attached, it's getting everything it needs. So the only time that it's going to suffocate while still in the mom is if it's coming out back end first, and the cord breaks, and then the mom decides to take a break herself. So somewhere, I hope I can find this video again. We had an intern here. When we have interns here, I let them do everything hands-on. Like, I'm standing right there next to them. And we had this happen. Like, the kid was being born back end first, and half the kid was out, and then the contraction ended and the mom just stopped pushing. And the intern goes, "Oh, come on, don't." And I'm like, "Pull it out." Pull it out now, quick. Because once the belly button was out, so if the belly button's out, the cord's either broken or, could be compressed so much. So if it's coming out back end first, you don't want mom to take a break in the middle, because once the cord breaks, that is indeed when the kid can become compromised. And that kid was very sluggish for a while after it was born, but ultimately it was fine. I sucked out its nose. So the cord is not going to break while it's in the mother, and you won't know if it does. But it's not going to break while it's still in the mom. And even if it did, there would be nothing you could do about it, because the kid literally dies within seconds, like maybe 30 seconds. I know this because we had a kid coming out one time that was breech, and its head got locked behind another kid's head. And so, like, the kid comes out, the hind legs are kicking, and I tried pulling and I couldn't. Like, it was like it was like pulling something that was in cement. And I was like, oh shit. And my husband goes, it's okay. I see the kid kicking. And I'm like, the cord probably broke. It's not going to be alive for long. And like within 30 seconds, it quit kicking. And so, then it was like, okay, well, there's nothing to freak out about. The kid is dead. I got to push most of this kid back in there so that I can then get the two heads unlocked. So anyway, let me see. Kristen said, in my last kidding 2 years ago, my girl pushed for 1.5 hours to get out the first two kids. The third huge kid came 2 hours later. Long labor, so stressful. So if they were all healthy, it was all fine. And there's a big difference between a goat that's just chilling versus a goat that's screaming bloody murder like this with her mouth wide open and her ears back. If she's screaming like that, then the kid's probably in an odd position. And it might straighten itself out, but it might not, So that's why I don't want them to get themselves worn out. So it's really just a matter of compassion for the mom. If she's screaming bloody murder, pushing like this, putting her head down on the ground with her tongue hanging out, that's the thing that stresses me out. If I have a goat with its head on the ground and its tongue hanging out, that's when I've started getting stressed. So, and it's just because I feel sorry for the doe. Marquita says that OBs get worried about infection, not oxygen. Yeah, exactly. And you don't need to worry about infection as long as you're not doing vaginal checks. So most of my goat, I've never stick my hand in 90% of my goats. Rebecca says, I've had them get stuck at that point with feet first, but the head just wasn't making it out. So when you say they're stuck, does that mean that you had to pull on the legs? Because that's not really stuck, and they probably would have gotten it out on their own eventually. It just would have taken time. But if the goat is having a really hard time with it, it probably means the kid's too big for that goat. And then, yeah, John says, we had a mom that passed one stillborn, then two healthy kids, then another stillborn 12 hours later. Yes. In fact, the crazy thing about this, when we had the schistosomus, born by C-section, right? Took her home the next day. She spent the night in the hospital, came back the next day, picked her up, took her home. The following day, 2 days after the C-section, my husband sends me a Voxer. By the way, if you guys don't use Voxer on your farm, it's so cool. It's so much better than texting. And we don't have good cell reception, so calling is not always all that reliable. So anyway, I get this Voxer from my husband. So it's a voice memo. And he's like, honey, there's something sticking out of Victoria. I don't know what it is. So I'm like, okay, that's weird. So I go out to the barn and I see this little black thing hanging out of her that kind of looks like, I don't know, it's kind of like a black almond or walnut. And so I squat down behind her and I lift up this little thing sticking out. And then all of a sudden I screamed and jumped back. And I'm like, oh my God, it's a head. It was a mummified fetus. And I saw the vet who did the C-section. I saw her looking in the uterus, like to see if there were more kids. But this kid it was the size of a hot dog. Like just the wiener part of the hot dog. I weighed it. It was 2 ounces. I got pictures of it. So again, these are in the kidding course. I got pictures of it like next to a ruler. I weighed it. It was 2 ounces. Oh my gosh, it stunk to high heaven. And I was like, just kind of pulling on it very gently, like, please don't break, please don't break. I got it out and got rid of it. And then the next day she passed another one. So they're very, people worry so much about goats having retained kids or not giving birth. They're very good at this. They even pass these tiny little things that are really awful. See, Gimme Faith Farm says, had a big doling with her elbows stuck on the pelvis. According to my vet, she wasn't going to push that out without help. Yeah, maybe she was like, if kids have stuff like tucked underneath them, like maybe her arms were tucked underneath her, so it just basically made the circumference bigger. That could have, been the difference. Like, even though she was only 3 pounds, it would have been more like the circumference of like a 5-pound kid or something, and she just wasn't big enough for that. So yeah, if kids kind of double up on themselves, that can be bad. That's why a spine first, like you've just got to rearrange it, because a goat can't give birth to one that's spine first. Nor could she give birth to a schistosomus, because a schistosomus is like a kid that's folded in half. So the schistosomus was like about 3.5 pounds. So that baby was like weirdly still alive up until the day probably up until a day or two before she went into labor. But there's no way something like that is coming out, because the circumference, it's basically like trying to push out 2 3-pound kids at once. So that would be pretty crazy. So Karen from Ontario. So this is why a lot of people, like, they get in they're thinking about the kidding course and they're like, well, are you going to teach me how to take care of all the things that could go wrong? No, that is impossible. One of the most important things to learn is when to call the vet. And so I love this testimonial that Karen gave me, because she said that she was able to figure out that she couldn't handle what was happening and she needed to call her vet, and they had a C-section. And that she called the vet a lot sooner than she would have if she hadn't had the course. So knowing when to call the vet is really important, and having a vet who's knowledgeable is so important. Please do not ask your dog and cat vet to do this. Probably the worst kidding story I ever heard was this woman who took her goat, because she basically contacted me because she's like, my goat had a C-section and I'm wondering if I can breed her again. And I said, well, it depends on why she had the C-section. So can you tell me what happened? And as it turns out, so like, she thought her goat was in labor, and this was her first goat. She was very upset. She thought the goat was in labor. She convinced her dog's vet to see her goat. And this was one of those people who was like, well, she's fully dilated, but we can't find kids. Okay, well, then she's not dilated. Like, if she's dilated, you would be able to put your hand into the uterus and you would find the kids. And so this vet also didn't know this. And so he did a C-section. And I think he just assumed goats all have twins. He got 2 kids delivered. And then he sewed up the uterus. And 30 minutes after he sewed up the uterus, the goat starts screaming bloody murder and gave birth to a 3rd kid. And it was alive. It was alive and healthy. So anyway, you really, like, there is such a big difference between dogs and goats. So you really, really have to make sure that you've got a vet that knows goats. And I also should point out too that my uterus that I was showing you guys is a human uterus. Goat uteruses have 2 horns. So the uterus itself does not look exactly like this, but the idea of the vagina, the vulva, the cervix, and the cervix being the opening to the uterus where the babies are, that's the most important thing to remember. So if you can't find babies, then you're not in the uterus. So just very quickly, this is a textbook presentation of a kid, just in case you haven't seen this before. And this is absolutely textbook. And I also want to point out, it was 5 minutes. The timestamp on these photos was 5 minutes from the first one with the one hoof sticking out to the last one where the head and the neck are out. And once the head and the neck are out, that's why you want to make sure. Somebody asked about, a couple people asked about the cord being broken. Once the head's out, the cord could break at any time. And so that's why you want to make sure that there's not the sac is not covering the nose. Mistake number 5, pulling on the placenta. So the doe will pass the placenta after about 2 to 4 hours after she kids. And if it takes longer than that, do not pull on it. We've got a whole podcast episode on the placenta, and Dr. Stewart from Virginia Tech talks about this and how this placenta is very different from a human placenta. And pulling on this placenta actually can cause a hemorrhage. And I know a couple people who have caused their goat to hemorrhage and die because they pulled on the placenta. So do not pull on the placenta. So a normal birth is 1 placenta. I know you have probably seen people, if you're on social media, you've probably seen people say there's 2. I've never been able to get any kind of a vet professor or researcher to confirm that that's possible. I used to think that it usually meant that like the placenta tore. And so, they don't look, most of them do not look very good. Okay. So you wouldn't know, like if this thing was torn in half, you wouldn't know that, whether it was 1 or 2. So, so if you're curious, count the cotyledons. A standard size goat has 70 to 125. I read that in the vet textbooks years ago, and I thought, so I guess 70 for Nigerians and 125 for big goats. But I counted a lot of, whenever I've got a good looking placenta, I count the cotyledons, and it's usually around 50 to 60. So this is what it's going to look like. And you usually see this. It can just look like a bunch of membranes. It can look vascular, like you can see veins in it. You may see the cotyledons, and and then this is like the best placenta picture I ever got. I was so excited because you can really see, like, this is what it looks like if your goat hasn't been dragging it around the pen, because it releases 1 cotyledon at a time, which is why it takes a long time to release. And the cotyledons are those purpley pruny things. If you have a stillborn kid, like some of those cotyledons might be gray, and that would be why the kid was stillborn, because there was something wrong with part of the placenta, like it was infected or quit working for some reason or whatever. But this is what a normal placenta looks like when a goat gives birth to healthy kids. And I wish I would have done a better job of, like, you can see one of the umbilical cords there sticking out. I wish I would have done a better job with this, of like finding more of the umbilical cords, so you could see how like they're attached in different parts of the placenta. And then this is a picture that was given to me by one of our Goats 365 members, Sean and Abby at Happy Little Hooves Farm, from one of their Arapawa goats. And I don't remember whether I think he counted the cotyledons and said there were 87, and it was a twin birth. So I've heard more and more people say that they've had more than 1 placenta. So I'm not totally ruling it out, but I wouldn't necessarily be looking for it. And if you're not really sure, you can always do what people call bumping the goat. You don't need to stick your hand in there. Bumping is just where you stand over the goat and you wrap your hands around her in front of the udder and you lift it. I have a video showing that in the kidding course because it's kind of hard to explain. So videos are very helpful. It is up to you. It is totally up to you about whether or not your doe eats the placenta. If sometimes first fresheners don't eat it, but experienced moms usually do. This is an instinct in nature. Animals eat their placenta because it's blood, like it's going to attract predators. Some people feed it to their livestock guardian dog. And you don't want to do that though unless all of your cotyledons look nice and dark purple like this. If any of them are gray or necrotic or it stinks, then you don't want to, because you don't know what caused that. The goat could have had an infection that caused it, and it could be an infection that could be transmitted to your dog. So you don't want to do it unless the placenta looks very healthy. Some goats are going, when the placenta, because like I said, it releases one by one. So it's going to be, and so sometimes it gets really annoying to them. They're walking around, you're dragging it through the straw, and it's like slapping them on the back of their legs. And so some of them will turn around and they'll start to bite at it and try to chew it. And I will tie it in a knot so that they can't reach it, because I don't want them to tear it, because I want to know like when the whole thing has come out, and if they tear it and eat what they can get and it tore like just inside the vulva, then I may not know that she's necessarily past the placenta. And then, if she gets an infection in 2 or 3 days, I really don't know why. I'm like, that she's, she may be because she has a retained placenta. They don't always get an infection if it gets retained. I've had about 4 by now. And I think it's been the first time it happened, I was giving, it was a sheep, and I was giving her an injection of penicillin every day for a week until she passed it. After that, I think I've had like 3 with goats, and only 1 got infected. The other passed it. Mistake number 6 is assuming that the kids will know what to do. Some do, some don't. If it's really cold, I mentioned this earlier, hypothermia is going to be first thing that's going to go is their sucking instinct. So if it's below freezing, you really need to be there. I don't leave the barn until I've seen the kids nurse. Like, they need to find the teat, nurse, lose it, find it again, lose it, find it again. Like, I've got to feel really comfortable that they are nursing before I leave. If they're not, if it's a beautiful day, I'll just sit out there and hang out with them. But if it's midnight and it's like 20 degrees, then I'm going to get a mug. Actually, I don't even get a milk bucket. I get a mug because I only need a couple ounces for each kid because these are Nigerians. So I get a mug and milk the doe, just standing there in the stall, and put the colostrum in a bottle and give it to the kids. You do not have to worry about nipple confusion in baby goats like in humans. In fact, it's just the opposite. Once a kid nurses on mom, they want nothing to do with the bottle. Like, they act like you're trying to poison them. So you have to be so insanely patient to get a baby goat to take a bottle after they've nursed. So there's no worries about giving them a bottle. You're giving them their mom's colostrum. The mom's not going to reject them or anything like that. So, because these are domesticated animals, they're not wild animals. If a kid is really having trouble nursing, like if you see milk coming out of the nose, it could have a cleft palate. Or if the teat keeps falling out of its mouth, it could have a cleft palate, because the only function that suction serves is to hold the teat in the mouth. The kid is using its tongue to to suckle. They don't suck, they suckle. Suction just keeps the teat in the mouth so that they can move their tongue from the front to the back of their mouth. A selenium or vitamin E deficiency can also cause problems with nursing. But that is not nearly as common as people think it is. It is usually, a lot of times it's hypothermia. All right, if you have kids that are born weak or non-responsive, do not do mouth to mouth. At the AGA conference in October, one of the vets that was speaking talked about someone she knew who graduated from vet school in the 90s and did mouth to mouth on a kid and wound up in the hospital for 3 months with Q fever because the kid was basically born dead because the mom had coccidiosis, which can cause abortions. So you never know when you're at the beginning of an abortion storm. The first kid that's born dead, you're like, oh my gosh, I want to do mouth to mouth to try and, revive it. That kid, first of all, has probably been dead for so long. Like it didn't just die. But the other thing is, the reason that it's born dead is because the mom has a disease. So, and a lot of those diseases that cause abortions in goats are zoonotic and will make people sick. And if you're pregnant, or could be pregnant, always wear gloves at a minimum because you don't want to put your baby at risk. Another thing that can cause abortions in goats is toxoplasmosis, which you probably know. Like, first thing you hear when you get pregnant, don't change the litter box for your cat. Don't change your cat's litter box because they could have toxoplasmosis. Cats can give it to goats and it can cause an abortion storm. Like back in 2011 at the ADGA conference, there was somebody who had an abortion storm. She had 15 does, all aborted because she had cats that gave all of her goats toxoplasmosis. So, if she hadn't known that and she'd been doing mouth to mouth, she could have gotten toxoplasmosis herself. So some tips, if a kid is just like kind of weak, then I hold them in their lap with their head lower than their body so that gravity can help drain mucus out. Use a bulb syringe to suction both nostrils. Same kind of bulb syringe that they give you in the hospital when you have a baby. And also, you can just buy them on Amazon. I have like 4 or 5, and I put them everywhere. Like I've got them in coat pockets and the closet and the barn office and everywhere, just in case I need one. I don't usually. It's like 1 out of 20 kids, 30 kids, but if you need it, you really need it now. And so if they're a little on the sluggish side, just rubbing them vigorously on the chest with one hand on each side can usually get them to perk up. And if you really think a kid is not breathing, there is an acupuncture point that's right there. There's a white dot in the middle of that goat's nose. There's an acupuncture point, and you can just press on it with your thumbnail really, really hard to try and get them to take a breath. So if you really feel that you need to do something, this is totally safe. If kids have hypothermia, you can tell. You don't need to take their temperature. If you put your finger in their mouth and it's cold, they have hypothermia. Now, they're not going to come out with hypothermia. This means that, like, you walked out there and you found them, like the goat gave birth unexpectedly and, in the snow or something. Or maybe like the kid is 2 days old and it's been starving. Because, it hasn't been getting enough colostrum. And so you can put it in warm water, or you can lay it on a heating pad, but do not wrap it up in a heating pad. I learned this one the hard way. If you wrap it up in a heating pad, you can overheat them and cause a seizure and brain damage. And so if you lay it on the heating pad, though, the kid's body, heat can escape from the kid's body to keep it from overheating. Most kids with hypothermia wind up becoming bottle babies because they're just so weak. It takes them a couple days to bounce back. And you want to get nice warm colostrum into them as quickly as possible after the kid gets warm. If you put colostrum into a kid with hypothermia, is not gonna work. Somebody contacted me one time and said, how do I tube feed a kid? And I said, why do you want to tube feed a kid? And she said, because it can't nurse. And if I had just told her how to tube a kid, she would have killed it, because the kid had hypothermia. So that's like, when somebody asks me a question, like, I want as many details as possible. And it became obvious as soon as I asked a couple questions that this kid had hypothermia. Once she got the kid warmed up, she didn't need to tube feed it. So it's really important that you understand that there are dozens of possible causes of death in newborns. They could have an infection, like we already talked about. If you see gray cotyledons on a placenta and there's a stillborn, it means it was an infection that caused the death of the kid. They could have a mineral deficiency. If you find a kid laying in the barn dead, it could have died from hypothermia. It could have been born with the sac on its nose, and the mom pulled it off after it suffocated. And there's all kinds of things that cannot be fixed. People think like, oh, I found the kid, it looked perfect, I'm so sad it was born, that I wasn't there, I could have saved it. Maybe not, because just because it looks good on the outside doesn't mean it was perfect on the inside. We've had kids born. We had one born that had no skull on the back of its head, so we could see the brain. We had one where the intestines were on the outside of the body, on the outside of the belly, like, where the belly button, the umbilicus was. There were just a bunch of intestines hanging out. So if you can see things like that, there's all kinds of things that could go wrong inside of a kid. There's one in the kidding course where this kid actually did not have a complete digestive tract. And I didn't know that until it was a couple days old. So a kid can be born without an anus. If you don't know that's and that it's probably going to die within a day or two if it doesn't have an anus, you're not going to know that if you're not looking for it. And if you have several kids die at birth or are stillborn, you need to get a necropsy to determine the cause of death, especially to see if you've got something contagious going on. There was this guy with a TikTok and a YouTube and stuff a year or two ago, and he's like, every doe that was bred to this buck is aborting, and I just don't know why. We think it's something genetically wrong with the buck. Because I just bought him last year. I'm like, no, I bet that buck the buck probably has a sexually transmitted disease that he gave to all your does, and that's why they're aborting. So, but you're not going to know that unless you submit the fetuses for necropsy, and you also need to submit the placenta, because sometimes the answer is in the placenta. So make sure that you keep the placenta if kids are dead and you want to know why. So I have barely touched the surface. If you want to learn, and I'm like, every year I'm like, I can do this in an hour. And I think I did pretty good tonight. I went less than 2 hours. So if you want to learn more, I have a course called Just Kidding and Raising Kids. Covers everything from pregnancy through birth and the first 2 months of a kid's life. There's over 80 videos. There's 8 does giving birth to 27 kids, including single, twins, triplets, quads, and even a set of quints. In fact, the quint birth was so funny because in the videos, Ellie's first birth as a first freshener, Ellie had a horrible first birth. It was one of the top 3 worst births I have ever had. 2 of the kids were born dead. 1 died within a few days, and the last one was not doing well. And she had basically, what happened was I had sold her and her sister, they got brought back to be bred. And then while they were here to be bred, the guy said he didn't want them back. And then as it turned out, I'm really glad he didn't get them back, because they both gave birth to these teeny tiny little kids. And I was really thankful he was willing to talk to me, because I was trying to figure, like, I haven't seen kids that small and in years and years, ever since we got our nutrition problems solved. And so I was really happy he was willing to talk to me. They used to take the goat. They were in the city of Chicago. They used to take the goats for walks every day. And the goats were eating cigarette butts. And he had bought some really crappy mineral that was mostly salt. It didn't actually have any minerals in it. So when he brought those goats to be bred, they actually were mineral deficient and nicotine addicted. I was able to find a study where they fed cigarette butts to dogs and found that it basically has all the same effects as it does if a person is like smoking, because there's a lot of nicotine in cigarette butts. And so that's why they had these tiny little babies. The placenta on Ellie's placenta was not normal. And people always ask me, well, if a goat had a problem the first time, is she going to have a problem again? And I always say, well, first of all, I say it depends. But she shouldn't. The answer is no, she shouldn't. And if she does, on my farm, she's retired. And I've only ever had to retire 3 does. And it was pretty obvious, like, what the problem was and why they had problems again. So I thought, you know what? People are seeing Ellie's first birth, which was horrible. Her second birth was completely fine. So for her third birth, I was like, you know what? I'm going to videotape this so I can add it to the course and people can see, like, here's the goat that just had this horrible birth. And now she gave birth to, these babies and are completely fine. And they come out, 5 come out, and they were completely fine. She was spitting them out so fast. It was one of those like torpedo things. And so it turned out to be an even more exciting video than I expected. So we've got all kinds of births on there. And mummified kids with hypothermia, newborn poop, newborn hooves, umbilical cords, how to figure out if your kids are polled or horned, how to disbud, how to castrate. You get a bonus ebook, and there's just there's so much in there. And so why not YouTube? This is Sherry's birth again, the one like I showed you guys at the very beginning where I had already pulled the sack off of the kid. So you can see there in that top photo, the sack is covering the kid's head. So if she had just given birth to it and it had fallen on the ground, it would have suffocated because the sack didn't break. So the problem with YouTube is that it would take you a really long time to find 80 good quality videos that cover all the things covered in Just Kidding, because most of the videos on YouTube are not good quality. People don't know what they're seeing. And there's a lot of intervention that doesn't need to be happening. And I actually decided to make this course after I started teaching for UMass, because I couldn't find good videos for my students at UMass. So I decided to start creating my own kidding videos. And then these are just a few of the comments that people have said in the evaluation of the course. And that is that somebody noted that, like, it was helpful to know what the wow udder was. I had been thinking for months the girls are developing udders, but when I went out and it had literally went from grapefruit to basketball, I knew this is it. And it was. Also, the visual on checking ligaments was great. So there's even more information available. In January, I usually have a sale because people are getting ready for kidding season. It's normally $197, but you can get it until next Tuesday for $177. I just realized I have to find the link for you guys. Let me see. Oh, no, that's not it. So this is kind of annoying. Because there it is. Shoot, I can't believe I'm having trouble finding. Okay, my brain is congested. Sometimes I have a co-pilot on here who drops things in the chat and helps, but I don't tonight. So so anyway, while I'm waiting for that, do you guys have any questions? I see several people saying thanks, and you are so welcome. I know I really wanted to do this tonight, even though I was a little worried about how much I might be coughing. New Life Acres said that their goat kitted at minus 30 today. That is really cold. Our coldest was ever minus 15. And that was bad. Minus 15 is when we had a kid whose tail froze, because our first kidding at below zero was minus 5 or minus 6. And we had a kid who lost the tips of his ears to frostbite, even though I was there with the blow dryer and everything, trying to keep it, trying to get them dry. We still we had to keep going back over and over again. And it was just this one kid. It was one of triplet bucks, and the other two were not having a problem. But I had to thaw out his ears multiple times, and they just kept freezing again and again. And they're frozen because, ears are like really soft. And they were not soft. They were frozen, literally frozen. And I kept thawing them with the blow dryer, and then they'd freeze again and again. So that was very frustrating. I put a link in the chat for the course, so you can get it at $20 off the regular price, and there are some payment plans available. I've got a payment plan, and I think when you go to the fund, if you pick the other one, that you can get, there's some other options too, like Klarna and some of those commercial payment plans. Simply Dish asked if there's anything special that you need to do for moms mid-pregnancy when it's this cold. And no, not really. As long as, they've got, if it's below zero, we don't usually let goats go outside. Because when they go outside, then you have to worry about wind chill. And when you add wind chill to minus zero, to minus zero temperatures, then it gets really bad. So they stay inside so that they're not in the wind. So Any other questions tonight? Wow, you guys are letting me off easy tonight. Yes, they appreciate warm water. All goats do, for sure. When it's cold out, we take them water. It's like basically like bath temperature, so that it's kind of body temperature for them. It helps them warm up. Kind of like us having a cup of hot tea or coffee. I know I need something hot to drink every morning when I get up because I always wake up cold. So when most goats, in this kind of cold weather, whether they are pregnant or not, if you give them warm water, they'll just like stick their head in there and just really suck it down. And I think that's because they're so, they just love it because they know right away, like, oh my gosh, this is warm. It's helping me warm up. As opposed to if they've got cold water, that they just kind of sip at it, because it's cold. Like it's really cold. So I love it. Alan said his wife just went out to take warm water to the goats. That's awesome. Yes. Okay. So, I also want to mention too, I got so distracted not being able to find the link. So if you haven't taken any of my courses yet, I am not one of those people who just gives you a bunch of recordings and tells you to go to Facebook if you've got questions. Absolutely not. In fact, if you are in my courses, I tell you, don't use our Facebook groups, okay? Because I have team members who check the Facebook groups. Those are for people who are not my students. They're not my Goats 365 members. And my team members, when somebody has a question, my team members give them links to articles and to podcast episodes and stuff like that. And they only... and if somebody's got a really challenging problem, they'll ask me or Tammy to get involved and help with that. Tammy's also a certified FAMACHA instructor like I am. And she's a retired neonatal intensive care unit nurse. So she's got really good science knowledge. And she's been raising goats for quite a while now. I think she must probably up to 8 or 9 years at this point, maybe longer. And she's been through all of my courses. And so if you guys have questions, there is a discussion board on every single lesson where you can ask questions and I will respond to them. So I'm not going to let you just languish there. There's also spreadsheets and other record keeping software and stuff you can print out if you like to print stuff out rather than using spreadsheets on your computer. And let me see, was there... okay. All right. Yeah. And everything's at goatacademy.net now. We are leaving the Thrifty Homesteader Academy, which was unteachable for 8 years. So, I don't see any more questions popping up. So if nobody else has any questions, I'll give you the link to the course one more time. You can, as soon as you join, like if you join tonight, you could start watching videos tonight. And then I'm also I forgot to mention, I'm going to have, the other thing about getting the course this time of year is that I also do some live Q&As on Zoom. So I'm going to do the first one next Thursday night. So you can get on there and we can actually talk about things rather than, posting in the discussion board on the courses. So thank you all for joining us tonight. I hope you found this helpful and that you are feeling more prepared and less stressed about your goats giving birth. So kidding is like my favorite time of the year. And I hope that it can be like that for everybody. So yes, Jane asked, are all the courses moved to the Goat Academy platform now? Yes, they are. They're still on Teachable, but we have sent, I recognize your name, so I know you've got courses. You should have received, if you bought courses from us in the past, you should have received an email that gave you a link to be able to access your courses on the Goat Academy. So if you need that, go ahead and send me an email and I'll send you the link. All right. I will see you guys later. Have a great evening and happy kidding season. Bye, everyone.